Welcome to Talking Materials Handling. In each episode, you'll hear from the thought leaders who are shaping what happens inside the four walls of the distribution center. We'll cover the gamut, from automation and robots to software and the next-gen technologies that are enabling the workforce of tomorrow. This podcast is hosted by Bob Trebilcock, the executive editor of Modern Materials Handling. Remember that Bob welcomes your comments. Now, to today's episode. Well, hello, and welcome to today's episode of Talking Materials Handling, how data, software, and hardware enable the future of supply chain warehouse operations. I'm Bob Trebilcock, and joining me today is Rasool Muttalib. Rasool is the Director of Global Strategy and Products for Dematic. Rasool, welcome, and I realize I just blew your last name even though we talked about it. So if you want to correct me, go ahead.
No, I think you were within the ballpark.
Okay. Well, if I'm in the ballpark, I'm okay. As I
You're in the ballpark. Maybe you weren't dead center on the red dot in the middle, but you were like the dot that's right outside of the one in the middle. So
well, I remembered the lit. You know, when you've grown up with Trebilcock, you answer to anything. So
that's right. That's right.
So hopefully you gave me a little bit of grace there. This is one in a series of podcasts I'm recording to highlight content from NextGen 2023, where Rasool was one of our presenters on this topic. More importantly, every company I talk to these days is in the midst of a digital transformation in their supply chain. And I think it's safe to say that the starting point is different from one company to the next. But the transformation I don't hear enough about is a transformation of warehouse operations. And that's what Rasool and I are going to talk about today. So let's get started. To kick this off, tell us briefly about your role and how your area is enabling new technologies and solutions at Dematic.
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Bob, for having me. It's certainly an honor to be here and following up on really an enjoyable time in our conference in Chicago late last year. It feels like so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. So a little bit about me and my role. I'm a 20-year technologist, served several executive roles over the past 10 years, all centered around data and operations. So my role at Dematic as Director of Global Data Strategy and Product is really focused on building out, our overall data strategy. And essentially what that means is it's so many things, and we'll talk about what that means today is, you can imagine a global company like Dematic. We have so many data assets all over the world. Sometimes those data assets are dormant. So it's all around pulling together all of our data and then executing against that strategy with a single data product vision. And that's really what my role is about in driving kind of Dematic strategic focus, which is very much focused on data, software, and artificial intelligence, especially nowadays going into this new era of what we're experiencing now.
So I think most of my listeners, like the attendees at last year's event, are familiar with the pressures in today's supply chain. Heck, they're living them. So let's talk a little about what's changing for them, at least in the areas where Dematic plays. One of the points I found interesting that you made at the conference was that a centralized software strategy, it was a control tower approach, can drive automation. Historically, I thought of control towers as related to logistics and transportation. When I wanted to know where everything was in the water or on the roads and so on. And historically, the warehouse was a lot of islands of automation. So walk us through what you mean by this different approach.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. And that this topic is really a critical one. And it is true that it used to be just this kind of island of operators, and there was some integration between them, and you'll find some automation, but it would likely have remained that way across all markets. But what really we're seeing right now is a major shift in expectations. And that shift is being driven in large part by the end consumer. And when you think about just the consumer today, and I said end consumer, but it could also be a business. What do we think of in terms of demands and expectations? We think of hyper-personalized, fast, adaptable, consumer-friendly, cost-effective, and then recently on top of everything, being sustainably conscious. So when you factor all of these new requirements into the broader equation of the supply chain, which in past times, all it really had to do was work. It just had to function and work, and that was considered success. But the only way to be responsive to all of these new demands and new expectations is to centralize operations with a control tower. So, what is a control tower? It's essentially a centralized set of software that connects almost every segment of a distribution center or multiple distribution centers. And it creates this network that is more customer centric, sustainable, responsive, and agile. And it brings together not just the technology, and this is very important, but it brings together the people in the process. And this is one of the things that a lot of people miss. Um, what's more is, the traditional models that were in place before this, they simply just can't keep up. And that's what a lot of our customers are feeling. And that's what some of the folks that you had at the conference were expressing. These new expectations are driving a set of demands that it's almost impossible to keep up with. And so using things like artificial intelligence, using things like machine learning, and then proactively integrating them allows our clients at a small scale and a massive scale to be responsive and meet all of these new expectations that our customers have across really the entire planet. I mean, everybody has raised their level of expectations. In other cases, where it's not just automation and it's not just software, where there's a human operator that is still very much needed. A lot of people say AI is replacing. It's not really replacing, it's adding on. But using software allows operations to be much more prescriptive and surgical about where they deploy their human resources, in which part of the warehouse, at what time, and being able to make these adjustments in real time is just something that is no longer a nice to have, it's table stakes. And the only way to do that is through some type of centralized control tower platform like the ones we're building now and deploying across our clients. And so that's why it's really so important, Bob. It's the shifts in expectations, the need to keep up and deliver things in a way that our clients are expecting is only possible through software and some type of integrated solution, which is a control tower.
Before we talk about data, I want to explore this control tower a little bit more because I'm really fascinated by it. So, I've been around this space for way too long. And when I first started writing about warehouses in the late 90s, automation was really just kind of coming in. And automation then was maybe a conveyor and sortation system. Um, and WMS systems were still sort of nascent at that time. So then, fast forward for many years, what we had was a WMS and a WCS. That if you had conveyor and sorter, or maybe an ASRS or a mini load or something like that. A few years ago, getting back to about I think 2011 when I first started writing about it, we saw WES, warehouse execution systems. Um, so we had, the WES, the WCS, the WMS. Now we've got, robotic control systems and other things out there. When you talk about a control tower, giving all that as context, you're talking about another layer that's going to sit on top of that and then be, I guess have access to data in terms of all those other systems, perhaps in that facility or across facilities. Is that the idea?
Yes, yeah, that's the fundamental premise of it, and a couple of things that are important about control tower because, as you mentioned, when you start to layer on all those different systems from WMS to WS to the next W.S
Right.
system that is yet to come, it's really about a maturity of operations. Each one of those brought a different layer of maturity in terms of how people can run their distribution centers or multi-distribution center networks. The control tower is just the next evolution of that. And it does sit on top, but it kind of also goes between in that it provides end to end visibility, that even goes outside of the actual warehouse itself. And that's part of where the value comes in is a lot of those systems were primarily focused on what we say inside the four walls
Right.
and getting really, really good at executing inside of the four walls. Well, what we've learned and been reminded of over the past, 12, 24 months, whatever it is that those are not the only things you need to be concerned about. You have a lot of moving pieces outside of the four walls that have direct impact into your operation. And so having upstream visibility of those things provides us a distinct advantage in terms of your ability to execute, your ability to reduce costs and reduce impacts to your supply chain. So the control tower complements all of those W star S systems, but it also gives you this far reaching outside the four wall visibility so you can see the things coming down the road before they actually hit your shop, and have an impact. And that's one of the real separators in terms of value that Control Tower brings to the table.
So, Rasool, is it, if I think of a warehouse, ultimately as an order fulfillment engine, even though it's going to be receiving stuff, and on the shipping side, will it have the decision making capabilities? Meaning, I get a bunch of orders from the order management system. Historically, they might have gone into the WMS that would then parcel it out to the WCS or the WES. But now, will that order fulfillment begin in this control tower because it knows, what's going on with orders? It knows maybe a truck is going to be late coming in, so it doesn't
Yeah.
make a lot of sense to fill that order. Those kind of things.
That you're precisely right, Bob.
Okay, great.
In those types of advantages, although small, if you add them up over the course of an entire day in a 24/7 operation, an entire week, or somebody that's receiving thousands of packages a day and they're able to make these micro adjustments, that adds up pretty quickly in terms of time saved. Your ability to actually shelve things in the order they need to be so that you can retrieve them in the order they need to be. There's so many downstream kind of optimized results just by having that one use case that you just mentioned and being able to switch the order or the mechanism in which you're taking these packages in, can have transformational impacts on your output for that day, that month, that quarter, and et cetera, and ultimately save in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars just by having that one capability.
That's a really fascinating evolution, I think, because again, I've covered that part of the space, the WMS space, going back to the late '90s, and have seen this evolution. And I know we've been headed towards that type of decision making. Let's talk about data for a moment, because data strategy is in your title. So hopefully, this is near and dear to your heart. I recorded an episode last week with the head of product innovation at Maersk. And data is obviously a big component of her innovation strategy. And as she told us later, it's also the most challenging because sometimes you can't just get the data. And she was saying it's not just from external partners, meaning like suppliers just don't have it or can't share it. But she said, internally, even at her own organization, she may need something from some other division in the organization. It's important to her, it's not a priority to them. And so even though you've got this data strategy, you may not be able to get the data. So how does, given data strategies in your title, how does a company prioritize data as a strategic product? Why is it important? What are the barriers to overcome
Yeah,
that?
this is number one, data is near and dear to my heart, and been having done it for so long, I could not agree more with the challenge. And this is a challenge that really at any company, any industry, you will run into that. It's all a part of kind of the data transformation and understanding data needs to come first, in so many ways. And it's a cultural shift. So, at Dematic, we've taken the data as a product approach. We know that data is the glue, data is the oil. In fact, data maturity is, in my mind, and when I tell people, it's really the alpha variable now to success in the modern age, no matter the industry or what area that we're discussing. If you just think about some of the advancements just over the past 12 months, let alone past few years, the general feeling that you get from everyone is the market is evolving and changing at a pace that we have never seen before. We are right now on this as we're having this conversation, we're at a point where the evolution of the technology, when you think about AI and ML, it's actually outpacing our ability in business to really dissect it, understand it, and implement it into our business processes in a way that we would like, which is exciting. It's very exciting, but all of those other areas that you outlined earlier is you can't do it without data. So, we spent arguably the past 10 years in what I would call, in what most people call is the digital transformation, digitizing your business. We are now firmly in the data transformation, and subsequently, in what happened probably faster than many of us thought would happen, is we're now in the AI transformation. And so the challenge is, if you haven't completed your digital transformation, which is what was referred to in terms of making your data available, well, it's very difficult to go into your data transformation because you don't have the data, which makes it almost impossible to do your AI transformation because all of those things are dependent upon one another. So, yes, all of those roadblocks and hurdles, so many enterprises are trying to solve and tackle and are certainly being faced with. It really comes down to, you know, a lot of business slash tech debt because it's not just about technology, it's also about process. So one strategy that I've always used and that we're currently using at Dematic to solve this kind of big problem that we've just outlined is to take a use case driven approach that allows you to identify a single problem, a single challenge that you're trying to solve that is prioritized across whoever your business leadership is, and then it makes the conversation around we need to unlock this capability. We need to show this particular metric, but this is the data that we need to prioritize in order to do it. And so having that sign off from the top that this use case is something that is important to the business, it makes it much easier to prioritize accessing data that's required to actually support that particular use case. And then once you have one or two of those in your belt, you just wash, rinse, and repeat that model. And essentially, you are covering all of those areas, almost all three in one. You're dealing with your digital transformation because you're making access to the data you need a priority in your business. You're covering your data transformation because you're piping that data through some type of centralized a solution like a control tower. But then you're also dealing with your AI transformation because that might be the capability that you're trying to unlock at the time. So using use cases for me has been an excellent tool that I've used many, many times to break down kind of the walls in terms of process and organizational barriers like you referred to. And it's the best way that you can actually make what I would call return on investment projects where you get the backing and et cetera to continue doing so. Otherwise, you will live in that world of just trying to get the data to actually support whatever your vision is that might be important to the business, but not able to be realized because you can't get these two teams to work together. So, use case driven approaches have usually solved that problem for me in the past.
You may have just touched on this next question, but if I think back to the Maersk example, she was talking about external and internal partners, which implies that wherever you sit in the organization, whatever your role is, you can't go it alone. So if you can't go it alone, how do you leverage your partners, in this journey, whether they are internal or external or both?
Yeah, that this is one of my, and I think we touched on this, Bob, at the conference as well. Is no, you can't go it alone. Not just speaking as a representative of Dematic, but certainly in supply chain automation, this is one of the areas where Dematic really shines. For most businesses today, it is extremely difficult to have all of the talent in house that you need in order to optimize your distribution center or network of distribution centers the way that you would otherwise have if you had a partner like Dematic. Not only is it the exceptional talent that's very, very hard to find, but the skill sets that are required to make these optimizations, most businesses do not need these skill sets on a 40-hour per week basis year after year. It's normally a one-time kind of specialized project or initiative to bring something back on track. So when you have access to kind of this a specialized partner, if you will, like Dematic, that will be the back end of your operation, we're pulling talent from all over the world, right? To create new solutions, to improve the solutions that might already be in place. And our talent pulls from a much broader solution base than any one company could ever hope to provide. So a company, will staff and run their operation as easy as good as they can, and most of our clients do a fine job. But they also have their day job of being profitable, of delivering whatever it is you're trying to deliver to their specific niche. We are constantly researching across our global network of resources ways to improve. We partner with universities all over the world to do use cases. I mean, and we eat our own dog food as well in terms of we partner with Google. So we recognized at Dematic that in order to be the best in cloud, in order to be the best in AI and these new things that we're doing, why not partner with somebody that is also a global leader so we can take advantage of their research and their capabilities? So can you go it alone? Can you do it by yourself? Sure, you can, but what is the likelihood that you can replicate this massive body of knowledge that is continually evolving, by the way, that Dematic can bring on demand versus what you might be able to do, individually, by yourself. Kind of, as I mentioned at the top of the call, just the pace of technology and the changes. It's, to me, in my opinion, um, we're no longer at a place where you can have a partner or not have a partner. It's the things are moving so quickly to stay just up to date, certainly exceed your competitors. You need to have a partner, to help you with some of these changes, how to interpret them, how to implement them into your distribution center, in order to outpace and out execute competitors and just stay relevant in the space. So that's something I highly recommend, Bob, as you know. And I think given all the changes and et cetera, it's becoming even more important today to have a partner than it was, say, even 10 years ago.
Rasool, another key point you made that I was kind of interested in at NextGen was that you can accelerate transformation with the transformation cloud. So, what's a transformation cloud? Number two, one, and then second part of that, why is cloud such a pivotal piece of the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, transformation cloud is I think a good way of saying leveraging cloud technology to bring your business current and then take it forward. Operating out of traditional data warehouses and data centers, that we used to have done for quite some time, it's again it's outdated in a way that it does not allow you to scale, and it does not allow you to keep up with all of the different changes that are happening, in real time. So many different areas that we could touch on. I mean, I mentioned scalability. That is an obvious one. In the cloud, you can scale to oblivion in terms of a software solution that you might need to deliver. When you think about running, large models, in terms of AI ML, they're very massive sometimes in terms of their compute and what they need. So for a customer to try to house that, computational power locally, it's just not cost effective. Cloud is a pay-as-you-go model. You only pay for what you use. There's massive reductions in terms of IT overhead. One of the keys and pain points that so many platform providers have struggled with over the years is availability and uptime. Bugs and etc. taking down your platform, or fiber cuts out in the middle of Wyoming, somewhere that you have nothing to do with, taking your platform offline and having to scramble all the people at 2 o'clock in the morning to try to figure out a way to get it back on. All of that goes away. You've got highly available, highly reliable systems. You can very quickly deploy changes and upgrades of your software. You have all of the advanced security features already embedded into the cloud that you're using. And then in our case, like with partnering with Google, we have the advantage of an infrastructure that is already tuned to allow us to implement our AI models and algorithms into our equations so that we don't have to go back into all of that work. So it just allows us to move at a pace that I think is just much more rapid and responsive than many of our competitors in the space who have not done this. So a transformational cloud is it allows you to do all of those things, and it allows you to be very effective, and it takes some time off of your roadmap because you don't have to worry about checking all those boxes before you make the next step. All of those things are done for you. So something I would recommend, again, just like the last thing, is it's really no longer a nice to have. These are some of the things and key components, especially from a data strategy perspective, that you must have in place in order to be effective in today's time.
Last question. So, in a sense, you're talking about the warehouse of the future. From where you, and Dematic's in the warehouse automation business. From where you sit, what do you think the warehouse of the future is going to look like in comparison to where we're at today? Is it going to be a matter of the hardware solutions, or is it going to be things like software and AI in the cloud that we may not see, but that are impacting the way we conduct our operations?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Bob. And you know, I think in certain areas and in conventions, this might create very heated debate and certainly spirited discussion. But when you think about hardware, there are two primary components of supply chain. It's the hardware that's bolted to the ground and the conveyance sort systems and all those things that you mentioned. But then there's a layer on top that is the software. The hardware, for the most part, is not going to change very much. You'll have certain robots and things like that that come into the mix that might automate certain areas. But really, the net gains in terms of efficiency and cost effectiveness and resiliency and speed, they're all going to come through software. So when you go back to those consumer and business demands that we talked about earlier, the technology is going to have to be lockstep with that. So at Dematic, that is our focus. We are dead set focused on delivering solutions that match the expectations of our clients and of the marketplace, and that exceed the things that they might think that they need. And that goes back to just our skill sets and our knowledge base and our global view of things. Is a lot of times we bring solutions that our customers didn't know they needed yet, but by the time they see it, it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. I absolutely need that, but I did not think of it. One of the key areas, as an example, is autonomous or semi-autonomous multi-channel fulfillment. And this is where a shop can take in orders, no matter if it was e-commerce, their traditional order flow, other areas that there's so many different order channels that have opened up as a result of social media and kind of the e-commerce world that we live in now. Having an intelligent supply chain that's fully integrated to support all of this is, again, you keep hearing me come back to this. It's table stakes now. It's not something that consumers and business partners are asking if you have it or not. The expectation is that you've already figured all this out, and I can order goods in whatever channel that I want for your shop. The fact is, there's so many of our clients and so many businesses out there that have not yet refitted themselves to be able to do this. So this is likely going to be a focus of ours for the foreseeable future. It's really upgrading and adding these new capabilities into a client's existing distribution center model, so it allows them to meet the expectations of the clients that we know, and as we've mentioned multiple times, are rapidly changing lockstep with the technology that is available. So our focus going forward will continue to be data. It'll continue to be software, and providing that to our customers to allow them to meet the expectations and exceed the expectations of the market.
Well, thank you, Rasool. That's all the time we have today. A special thanks to my guest, Rasool Muttalib from Dematic, and thank you for joining. And Rasool, I apologize because I keep butchering your last name. I hope you'll be back for our next episode. And finally, be sure to go to nextgensupplychainconference.com and enter your email address for updates about NextGen 2024. We're planning another great event for talking materials handling and the NextGen conference. I'm Bob Trebilcock, and Rasool, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Talking Materials Handling is produced by Modern Materials Handling and Peerless Media. You can find Talking Materials Handling on mmh.com, on iTunes under SC247, or just Google SC247 Podcasts. We're on all the popular podcast platforms. For more information, be sure to visit mmh.com, and we hope you'll join us again for our next episode.